Okay, so today we're going to factor polynomials using the greatest common factor. So we start off, I have an example here, we're going to have 2x squared minus 4. So the first thing you want to do is find the greatest common factor for 2x squared and 4. So the biggest number that's going to go into both of them is 2, and the 4 doesn't have any x's, so the greatest common factor is actually just going to be 2. So I use the distributive property essentially in reverse. I'm going to divide that 2 out of both of those and then put what's left inside parentheses. So if I divide 2x squared by 2, I'm left with x squared, and then negative 4 divided by 2, I'm left with 2. So I'm using the distributive property, but I'm going backwards. And then you always want to check your answer to make sure that you did it right. So if I go back and I multiply, I should end up where I started. So 2 times x squared, I get 2x squared. 2 times negative 2, I get minus 4. And sure enough, that's what I started with. And so I know I factored it correctly. And my answer would be 2 times the quantity x squared minus 2. So we'll do some more examples of that. All right, let's take a look at this next one. We're going to factor it, looking for the greatest common factor. So if I look at 8x cubed minus 4x squared minus 16x, the biggest number that goes into 8, 4, and 16 would be 4. And they have 1x. All of them has at least 1x in common. So 4x would be my GCF. So I'm going to divide that 4x out of each of these terms and put what's left in the parentheses. So 8 divided by 4 is 2. And do I have more x's on the top or the bottom? How many more? Right, I've got x squared. Then on the middle term, my 4's cancel out, and I have just one more x, so it's just an x. And then in the last term, my x's cancel out. 16 divided by 4 is 4. And so if I factor out the 4x, I get 4x times the quantity 2x squared minus x minus 4. And again, if you double check it, 4x times 2x squared gives me 8x cubed. 4x times negative x gives me minus 4x squared. And 4x times negative 4 gives me minus 16x. And that's where we started, so I know I did it right. Okay, so x is the greatest common factor because there isn't a number that goes into 5 and 9 other than 1. So if we divide out the x, we're left with 5 plus 9x squared in the parentheses. Alrighty. Here's another example for your notes. Alright, so now I have negative 14x minus 12x squared. When you have your leading term has a negative, it's a good idea to get in the habit of factoring out the negative as well as the number. Because when we get into factoring trinomials, it's going to be a lot easier if your leading term is not negative. So we're going to factor out that negative, and 2 goes into 14 and 12, and they have 1x in common. So I'm going to factor out a negative 2x from each of them. And if I do that, my negative divided by a negative, that becomes positive. Here the x's cancel out. So 2 goes into 14 7 times. And then again, the second term is positive. 2 goes into 12 6 times. And there's also one more x on top. So the answer ends up being negative 2x times the quantity 7 plus 6x. Alright, so here's one for you to try on your whiteboards. Alright, so the GCF was negative y squared, and when you divide that out, you got 18y plus 7 to go in your parentheses. All right, let's take a look at another one for your notes. All right, so I have 3x cubed plus 2x squared minus 10. So is there a number that goes into 3, 2, and 10? Just one. And they don't all have x's, so they don't even have an x in common. So 1 is the only common factor. If 1 is the only common factor, then that means it is prime. And you can't factor it. All right, and here's another one for your notes. Now we've got 4x cubed minus 12x squared plus 2x. And so 2 goes into all of those. It's the biggest number that will divide into them. And they all have at least one x, so I can divide out the 2x. Alright, so when I divide all of those by 2x, I have 2x squared minus 6x. And what's going to happen if I have 2x divided by 2x? Everything cancels out. It is equal to 1. You want to be real careful on that because it doesn't just disappear. You have to remember that anything divided by itself is 1, and so you have to leave that 1 behind to kind of hold its place. Because look what happens if I just drop it out. If we had said it was 2x squared minus 6x and we forget that 1, then when I go back and multiply it, 2x times that, I get 4x cubed, and then I get minus 12x squared, and I'm missing the 2x on the end altogether. So you want to be sure that you don't do it that way. Leave behind the 1 to hold the place for that last term. Alrighty, and so we've got one more here for you to do on your whiteboards. Okay, and so the answer is 2x squared times the quantity 4x squared plus 2x minus 1. And that's all for now.